What if everything we know about human potential is only a fraction of the truth? There are stories, strange, astonishing, and rigorously documented, of ordinary people who, under extraordinary circumstances, unlocked abilities that seem to defy biology. Men and women who should not exist, according to the textbooks. And yet they do. Lightning-struck savants, blind individuals who see with sound, people who lift cars or memorize entire decades of personal life in perfect detail. They are not myths. They are real, verified by doctors, scientists, and time. This documentary is not about superheroes or science fiction. It's about us, about the human body and mind, about what lies dormant beneath the surface of what we call normal. Each chapter that follows is a doorway into one of 10 mysterious abilities that modern science has yet to fully explain. Abilities that emerge spontaneously in some and can be taught to others with the right training. Abilities that call into question where the true boundaries of biology end and where human potential truly begins. What makes these stories even more haunting is how they begin, not with glory, but often with trauma, isolation, or adversity. A lightning bolt, a lifelong disability, a near-death moment. And from that crucible, something magnificent awakens, something no one saw coming, least of all the individuals themselves. Take Alonzo Clemens, who could barely manage arithmetic until a lightning strike rewired his brain into a living calculator. Or Jill Price, who remembers every day of her life in microscopic detail, down to the weather and what she wore. Or Daniel Kish, born blind, who trained himself to echolocate like a bat, navigating by sound in ways that rival modern sonar. These are not exaggerations. They are carefully studied, peer-reviewed anomalies. And yet, they hint at a deeper truth, that human limitations may be more about access than ability. Each story in this series is grounded in science, but none is fully explained by it. They force us to reckon with what neuroscience, biology, and physics still don't understand about the human machine. Not every mystery can be unraveled, but each reveals a crack in the wall of certainty that surrounds what we believe is possible. So, in this journey through the unknown capacities of the human mind and body, we will not be chasing myths. We'll be listening to the evidence. We'll be asking the uncomfortable questions. Could our memories be more perfect than we realize? Are there senses we've forgotten how to use? Could we, in the right moment, lift something impossible or learn to heal with a touch? This is not just a story about anomalies. It's about reimagining the spectrum of what it means to be human. Welcome to a world that lives just beneath the surface of what you thought you knew. A world where the limits of biology are quietly being rewritten, not by machines, but by us. This is the story of 10 human abilities that science still cannot explain, and what they reveal about who we really are. It began with a storm. In September 2002, Alonzo Clemens was walking across a parking lot in Denver, Colorado, when lightning split the sky and struck him directly. Most would not survive such a blast. But Clemens awoke 3 days later in a hospital bed, not just alive, but altered. The man who had once struggled with basic arithmetic was now seeing numbers as living things. He had become, quite literally, a mathematical savant. Before the strike, Clemens led a quiet life. He worked with his hands, avoided anything numerical, and described numbers as squiggles that never made sense. But after that fateful moment, something inside his brain had changed. When he looked at numbers, he didn't just see them, he felt them. Complex calculations unfolded before him like conversations. Prime numbers shimmered as shades of blue. Perfect squares spiraled into golden patterns. Equations revealed themselves as three-dimensional shapes that rotated effortlessly in his mind. Doctors were stunned. Brain scans showed unusual activity, new neural pathways lighting up between regions of his brain that usually operate in isolation. The lightning had somehow bridged them, allowing information to flow in ways no neurologist had ever documented. His abilities weren't just fast, they were elegant. He could factor large numbers or solve advanced equations not just correctly, but with methods that seasoned mathematicians later described as novel and beautiful. Clemens didn't learn these abilities. He simply knew them. When asked how he solved such problems, he responded with childlike clarity. "I ask the numbers what they want to be, and they tell me." To him, mathematics wasn't a task. It was a dialogue. His mind bypassed conscious calculation altogether, operating on a level that traditional neuroscience cannot account for. What happened inside Alonzo Clemens's brain may never be fully understood, but his case suggests something radical. That genius might not be the result of education or training alone. That somewhere inside all of us lies a potential, a sleeping architecture waiting for the right switch to be flipped. And what if trauma, rather than destroying the brain, could sometimes activate these hidden corridors of perception? The story of Clemens is more than a neurological anomaly. It is a window into the unfathomed capacities of the human mind, a testament to the possibility that we carry within us more than we know, abilities that require only the right storm to awaken. What else lies buried in the dark corners of our neural networks, waiting for a spark to bring it to light? Close your eyes. Imagine navigating a crowded city street, weaving between traffic, hearing conversations, identifying objects, all without sight. For Daniel Kish, this is not imagination. It is how he lives every day. Born completely blind, Daniel developed something science had long deemed impossible for humans: echolocation. Using a series of tongue clicks, he generates sound waves that bounce off his surroundings. The returning echoes form a three-dimensional map in his mind, a visual world built from sound. This isn't a metaphor. Brain scans reveal that when Kish echolocates, his visual cortex, the part of the brain typically devoted to sight, activates just as it would in someone with perfect vision. In essence, he sees with sound. His mind transforms echoes into shapes, textures, distance, even emotions. He can detect a pencil from several meters away, distinguish between glass and metal by their acoustic fingerprints, and navigate obstacle courses with a precision that rivals sighted individuals. Even more astonishing, Daniel can perceive facial expressions, smiles, frowns, surprise, using only the subtle variations in how sound reflects off muscle movement. Military research teams have confirmed that the level of detail his brain extracts exceeds what many sonar technologies can achieve. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Daniel's story is this: he can teach others to do it. Through his organization, World Access for the Blind, Daniel has trained hundreds of blind individuals to develop echolocation abilities. Brain imaging of his students shows the same rewiring of the visual cortex, proof that this skill isn't a fluke of birth or a superpower. It's latent potential. A dormant capacity of the human brain unlocked through need, focus, and training. What Daniel's life reveals is deeply unsettling to conventional neuroscience. If the brain can reassign one sense to perform the function of another, what other sensory transformations are possible? Could we, with the right conditions, learn to hear colors, feel light, or even sense emotions as patterns in space? Daniel's clicks echo louder than sound. They speak of a plastic, adaptive mind capable of stunning recalibration. A mind that, when challenged by blindness, doesn't diminish, but evolves. His story leaves us with a profound question. Are we truly limited by our biology, or only by the ways we've learned to use it? Imagine remembering every moment of your life, not just the milestones, but the texture of a Tuesday in 1987, what you ate for breakfast, the clothes you wore, the color of the sky, the exact words in a conversation long forgotten by everyone else. For Jill Price, this is not a party trick. It's her reality. Since the age of 8, she has remembered every single day of her life with perfect clarity. She suffers, or lives, with what scientists call highly superior autobiographical memory, or HSAM. It is a condition so rare, only a few dozen people in the world have ever been diagnosed with it. When Jill first reached out to researchers, it was not to boast, but to seek relief. Her memory was a relentless tide, unstoppable, unfiltered. She couldn't forget even the painful moments. Every emotion, every regret, replayed with the vividness of the present. For her, the past was never past. Neuroscientists at UC Irvine studied Jill extensively. What they found challenged core beliefs about memory capacity and storage. Her brain showed structural differences in the hippocampus and temporal lobes, the areas responsible for memory formation and recall. These regions were not only enlarged, but unusually active, as though constantly recording and indexing every sensory detail and emotional nuance. Testing her memory was like opening a time capsule. Random dates from decades past would unlock cascades of information: the weather, the headlines, the people she spoke to, the songs playing on the radio. Verified against diaries, historical records, and witness accounts, her recollections were repeatedly confirmed to be accurate. And yet Jill's gift, or burden, had boundaries. Her encyclopedic memory applied to her own life, not to abstract information. She couldn't memorize historical facts or mathematical formulas with the same ease. Her brain seemed to prioritize the personal over the general, recording lived experience like an internal documentary film crew that never stops rolling. What makes her condition even more mysterious is how effortless it is. She doesn't try to remember. She simply can't forget. It's as though her brain lacks the filters that allow the rest of us to let go of what no longer matters. But if forgetting is a feature, not a flaw, what does it mean to live without it? Jill Price's memory defies the biological limits we've assumed to be universal. It invites us to reconsider the mechanisms of forgetting and whether perfect recall might be possible for more of us under different neural configurations. Could the ability to remember everything be a hidden faculty, muted in most but fully switched on in a few? Her life raises a haunting question. If memory defines identity, then what happens when the past never lets go? It happened in an instant. On a cold January day in 2012, Angela Cavallo watched in horror as her teenage son became trapped beneath a 3,000-pound Chevrolet Impala. The jack had slipped. The car had collapsed. Without thinking, Angela ran to the wreckage and lifted the vehicle high enough for neighbors to pull her son to safety. Then, just as suddenly, she collapsed. By all known standards of human physiology, what Angela did should have been impossible. The structure of our muscles, tendons, and bones is not built to lift that kind of weight. And yet she did it, not as a trained weightlifter, but as a desperate mother whose body momentarily broke free from its limits. Angela's story is not unique. Across decades and continents, there are hundreds of reports of ordinary people performing acts of superhuman strength during emergencies. Lifting cars, fighting off wild animals, bending steel with bare hands. These rare, spontaneous feats are known as hysterical strength, and science still has no clear explanation for how they happen. What we do know is that under normal conditions, the human body uses only a fraction of its muscle fibers, about 65%. The rest remain dormant, protected by neural governors designed to prevent damage. But during hysterical strength episodes, something bypasses those safety systems. The full potential of the musculature is unleashed. Studies show that in these moments, adrenaline floods the body to levels that would ordinarily be toxic. Pain disappears, fear evaporates. Electrical activity in the muscles surges beyond what should be possible with standard neural input. It's as if the brain steps aside and something deeper takes over. Dr. E. Paul Zare, a neuroscientist studying motor control, found that during these episodes, the brain's connection to muscle changes. Neural pathways, usually under subconscious control, become consciously accessible, giving individuals direct command over their full physical capacity, if only for seconds. And perhaps that's what makes this ability so haunting: its precision. The strength appears only when it is needed most and vanishes without trace. No permanent damage, no repeat performance, just a fleeting glimpse into what the body can do when its limits are removed. Why do we carry such immense power if we're never meant to use it? Is it protection, evolutionary contingency, or something more mysterious? An emergency override built into the human system, available only in moments when life hangs in the balance? Angela Cavallo didn't train for her moment of strength. She didn't choose it. It chose her. And in that moment, the boundary between possible and impossible simply disappeared. Her story suggests a deeper truth, that the limits we live within may not be set in stone, but only written in the soft language of fear, habit, and restraint. And that beneath those boundaries, extraordinary power waits in silence. In a crowded auditorium in London, 1980, silence fell as a young woman stood before a blackboard. The audience waited, skeptical. She was handed a problem, a multiplication of two massive numbers, each with 13 digits. An equation so complex it would stump even seasoned mathematicians without a calculator. In 28 seconds, she answered correctly, faster than the machines. Her name was Shakuntala Devi, and she was known around the world as the human computer. Born in India in 1929, Devi had no formal mathematical training. What she did have was something no textbook could explain: an innate, almost mystical relationship with numbers. From a young age, she could solve complex problems effortlessly, seeing answers that others had to calculate step by step. When asked how she did it, she described numbers not as symbols, but as friends. She claimed to see patterns, shapes, and relationships, mathematics as a living language that spoke to her directly. Neurologists were baffled. Brain imaging studies revealed that Devi's mind did not follow the usual neural routes for mathematical processing. Regions that lay dormant in most people were lit up in her. The patterns of activity didn't align with how we expect the brain to handle computation. It was as if her brain had developed its own operating system for numbers. But Devi's genius wasn't just raw speed, it was elegance. Mathematicians analyzing her methods discovered that her mental shortcuts often mirrored or improved upon established algorithms. In some cases, she created entirely new approaches, proof that her abilities weren't just talent, but innovation. And perhaps most remarkable of all, she could teach it. Shakuntala believed that her gift was not unique, but untapped. She trained students in pattern recognition, mental visualization, and intuitive number sense. Many showed dramatic improvement, suggesting that the boundary between genius and ordinary thinking might be thinner than we believe. Her story blurs the line between education and cognition, between what we learn and what we may already possess but haven't learned to access. Could it be that the human brain is capable of extraordinary computation, but that we've trained it not to? Devi's life wasn't only about numbers, it was about breaking assumptions. She proved that math could be emotional, personal, even beautiful. That behind the cold certainty of numbers lies a warm human intuition. And in doing so, she left us with a question far larger than any equation. What if intelligence isn't about what we know, but how deeply we're willing to see? In the fog-choked hills of 19th century Italy, a boy named Giuseppe Mercalli wandered through fields guided not by sight or stars, but by a sensation deep within his body. A pull, a direction, a knowing. By the time he reached adulthood, Mercalli had discovered what he would later describe as an inner compass, an unexplainable ability to sense magnetic north with astonishing accuracy. Long before GPS or digital instruments, Mercalli could navigate through forests, cities, and desolate plains without ever losing his way. Scientists who studied him blindfolded him, spun him, relocated him, yet he consistently pointed to magnetic north with less than 2 degrees of error. At first, skeptics dismissed him as a lucky guesser or a magician of memory, but testing proved otherwise. No trick, no sleight of hand, just an uncanny ability that defied all understanding of human biology. The deeper mystery, though, came years later, when Mercalli began predicting earthquakes, not through seismographs, but by sensing tremors not yet felt. He described the sensation as magnetic chaos, a disruption in the Earth's electromagnetic field that would ripple through his body hours or days before the ground shook. He warned of the 1908 Messina quake with chilling accuracy. Decades later, modern instruments would confirm what Mercalli had described. Electromagnetic disturbances often precede seismic events. But what machines now detect with delicate sensors Mercalli felt, viscerally, intimately. How? Recent research has uncovered that humans possess tiny magnetite crystals in our nasal passages and inner ears, biological remnants of a navigation system used by birds, whales, and insects. But while most of us have lost the conscious ability to interpret these signals, Mercalli's brain seemed wired to receive and translate them with crystal clarity. His sensitivity was not dulled by city noise or modern interference. Whether in urban centers or remote countryside, his internal compass remained steadfast. His mind filtered out the static, zeroing in on the subtle cues of Earth's magnetic heartbeat, and he was not entirely alone. In controlled studies, a small percentage of people demonstrated weak magnetoreception, suggesting that this faculty may not be gone, just dormant. So why did Giuseppe Mercalli retain what the rest of us forgot? Was it genetic, a twist of brain wiring, or simply a heightened awareness, a listening for signals we've long since learned to ignore? Mercalli's story reminds us that the Earth speaks not only through wind and weather, but through invisible fields that pulse beneath our feet. And perhaps, long ago, we all knew how to listen. What else have we lost, not through evolution, but through forgetting? From a helicopter window high above London, a young man peers down at the city below. The flight lasts only 20 minutes. Buildings blur past, streets tangle in every direction. Then the helicopter lands. Hours later, that same man sits in a quiet studio, pencil in hand. With no photographs, no maps, no second glance, he begins to draw the entire city from memory. Every tower, every alley, every window, down to the placement of individual bricks. His name is Stephen Wiltshire, and his mind is a camera. Diagnosed with autism at age 3, Stephen didn't speak a word until he was 9. But from the moment he first picked up a pencil, it was clear that something extraordinary lived behind his silence. He could observe a scene once, just a glance, and reproduce it in exquisite detail. Skylines, street grids, architectural flourishes, all committed to memory and transcribed with mechanical precision. Doctors and scientists were stunned. Brain scans revealed intense activity in his visual cortex and an unusual connection between areas of perception and motor control. It was as if his brain bypassed the usual processes of memory and simply recorded what he saw, like a biological hard drive. Stephen's abilities weren't limited to stillness. He could remember moving scenes, traffic flows, shifting shadows, people crossing streets, and integrate them seamlessly into his drawings. He captured not just the shape of things, but their energy, their movement, their life. After that brief flight over London, Stephen drew a panorama stretching 15 feet across. Urban planners later confirmed the accuracy. Window placements, proportions, rooftop angles, nearly flawless. What makes his mind even more remarkable is its speed. Drawings that would take architects weeks to draft, he completes in hours. Not with rulers or calculations, but with a steady hand and perfect recall. And he never studies, never rehearses. He simply sees and remembers. Neurologically, his abilities remain a mystery. No anatomical abnormality explains them. Researchers believe his visual memory results from an enhanced bridge between sensory input and motor output. But the exact mechanism, how fleeting images become permanent memory, remains unknown. Stephen's story challenges our understanding of memory, attention, and perception. In most of us, the brain filters what we see, selecting what matters and discarding the rest. But in him, there is no filter. Everything is stored. Everything is accessible. Could it be that the rest of us forget not because we must, but because we've learned to? Stephen Wiltshire draws the world not as it should be, or as we remember it, but exactly as it is. His hand offers more than art. It offers proof. Proof that the human mind, under the right conditions, can become something far more powerful than we ever imagined. And it leaves us wondering, how much do we truly see and how much do we unknowingly erase? The room was silent, but something was happening. A man stood over a patient, not with a scalpel or syringe, but with bare hands. No anesthesia, no operating room. Yet the patient's pain faded, swelling reduced, tumors shrank. Under the scrutiny of medical professionals, he touched people, and they healed. His name was João de Deus, or John of God, and for decades he was at the center of one of the most controversial and fascinating chapters in medical mystery. Under controlled observation, João performed procedures that defied every principle of conventional medicine. He diagnosed conditions through touch alone, identifying tumors, nerve damage, and circulatory blockages without imaging equipment. More startling were the recoveries. Cases where traditional treatment had failed, yet after a single session with João, measurable improvements appeared. Blood chemistry normalized. Immune function strengthened. Pain vanished. Researchers from institutions like Harvard and the Institute of Noetic Sciences documented these cases. They found consistent physiological changes in patients post-treatment, changes that couldn't be explained by placebo or suggestion. Brain scans of João during sessions revealed unusual gamma wave patterns, brain activity typically associated with deep meditation or heightened states of consciousness. And curiously, the patient's own bodies responded in tandem, showing shifts in biological markers during the healing process. What could explain this? Theories emerged. Perhaps João had learned to influence the autonomic nervous system, regulating immune response, cellular repair, and inflammation through conscious intent. Perhaps his touch activated dormant healing processes deep within the body's biology. Or perhaps, most radically, consciousness itself could influence matter in ways science has yet to understand. What set João apart was not just his apparent ability, but its reproducibility. He trained others. Some of his students developed measurable healing skills, though none as profound. This suggested that what he did was not solely a gift, but a skill, something that could be learned, at least in part. Skeptics dismissed him. Others believed blindly. But the real mystery lay not in belief, but in biology. His work, carefully documented, medically reviewed, pointed to one inescapable idea, that the human mind and body are capable of communication we do not yet understand. Modern medicine separates the physical from the mental, yet João's sessions blurred that line entirely. His patients didn't just feel better, their bodies changed. Is it possible that healing, like language or memory, is a faculty, latent in us all, waiting to be activated? The story of João de Deus forces us to reconsider the limits of biology. If consciousness can reach into cells and tissues, what else might it touch? And what if the future of medicine lies not only in machines, but in the forgotten depths of the human mind? In a modest flat in London, a man named Christopher sits surrounded by books, not just in English, but in Greek, Russian, Welsh, Finnish, and over a dozen more. He can speak, read, and translate in all of them. Yet he cannot tie his shoes without help. Christopher has an IQ of 67. By standard measures, he is intellectually disabled. He struggles with basic math, cannot manage money, and needs assistance with daily tasks. But when it comes to language, he is unmatched. First documented by linguists Neil Smith and Ianthe Maria Simply, Christopher possesses an ability that modern science cannot fully explain. He is a natural language acquisition machine. New languages come to him not through study, but as if remembered. Within weeks, he can internalize grammatical rules, detect linguistic patterns, and translate between unfamiliar tongues with uncanny fluency. Tested with constructed languages designed to be difficult, even intentionally irregular, Christopher learns them faster than trained linguists. His understanding goes beyond vocabulary. He grasps structure, nuance, and cultural tone. He can even explain why certain sentence constructions feel right or wrong, as if he were born with an internal compass for grammar. Brain imaging reveals the impossible. His language centers are hyperactive, with connectivity patterns that bypass the areas responsible for general reasoning. It's as if his mind has partitioned itself, sealing off most cognitive functions while leaving one tower of brilliance untouched and thriving. What's more, Christopher is equally gifted with sign languages, acquiring them just as easily as spoken ones. This reveals something profound. His linguistic ability is not tied to sound, but to structure. His mind perceives language as pure architecture, symbols, patterns, movement, and meaning woven together. And despite his intellectual disability, he exhibits an extraordinary metalinguistic awareness. He can articulate how languages differ, why certain phrases sound poetic in one tongue and awkward in another. In conversation, he switches fluidly between languages, playfully weaving them together in ways that both delight and confound. How is this possible? No known theory of intelligence can account for such a disconnect between cognitive impairment and linguistic mastery. Christopher's case suggests the existence of a specialized neural module for language, one that can operate independently of overall IQ. It also hints at something more unsettling, that the true potential for language learning might exist in all of us, hidden behind cultural assumptions and teaching methods that fail to engage it. Christopher never set out to become a polyglot. He simply can't not learn language. His life is a living contradiction, one that forces us to question the foundations of intelligence, identity, and education. He proves that linguistic genius does not require high IQ, academic rigor, or conscious effort. Sometimes it emerges in silence, in simplicity, in a mind shaped not by what it cannot do, but by what it does extraordinarily well. And it leaves us with a disarming possibility. What if brilliance is not the absence of limitation, but the presence of a single, unwavering flame that refuses to go out? Snow crunches under bare feet. The air is thin, biting. Temperatures plunge far below freezing. Most people would not last minutes here without thermal gear. But Wim Hof, known as the Iceman, walks calmly across the ice, shirtless, breathing deeply, utterly unfazed by the cold. He has climbed part of Mount Everest in only shorts, swum under ice for long distances, run marathons barefoot through Arctic conditions. What's more, he doesn't just survive, he thrives. Scientists first dismissed Hof as an anomaly, a man with a freak resistance to cold. But when researchers began to study him, the data told a different story. Hof wasn't surviving extreme temperatures through luck or mutation. He was controlling his body temperature consciously. At Wayne State University, and Radboud University in the Netherlands, researchers observed the impossible. Hoff could raise his core body temperature at will. He increased his heart rate, suppressed inflammation, and activated his sympathetic nervous system. Systems we are taught are beyond conscious control. But Hoff did it with breathing, focus, and meditation. Brain scans revealed unusual activity in areas tied to pain regulation and autonomic function. His body generated heat, not through shivering or external movement, but through internal cellular mechanisms. Brown fat cells, normally dormant, lit up in his body like internal furnaces, triggered by nothing but willpower. Even more astonishing, he could teach others to do the same. Volunteers trained in Hoff's breathing techniques quickly showed improvements in cold resistance, immune response, and stress management. In one study, participants were injected with endotoxins. The untrained group developed fever, nausea, and inflammation. The Hoff-trained group didn't. Their bodies shut down the immune reaction, on command. What does this mean? It means that the boundary between the conscious and unconscious body is far more fluid than science assumed. That our minds may have the keys to systems we believed were off-limits: immune function, inflammation, pain response, thermoregulation. And Hoff doesn't see himself as extraordinary. What I can do, he says, anyone can learn. For him, it's not about defying nature. It's about remembering an ancient dialogue between mind and body that most of us have forgotten. His story challenges our assumptions about human frailty. It suggests that evolution didn't strip us of our resilience, but that comfort, culture, and fear dulled it. What if the body is not a passive vessel, but a responsive, intelligent system waiting to be awakened? Wim Hof's journey into the cold reveals not the limits of endurance, but the untapped warmth within us all. A sudden flash, a surge of heat, a life changed forever. When a bolt of lightning struck Alonzo Clemens, it didn't end his story. It began one. His ordinary mind became a mathematical savant, unlocking abilities no education could explain. Across the world, others like him emerged, each with a different key turned inside their brain. Daniel Kish sees with sound, mapping the world with echoes. Jill Price cannot forget, her memory a flawless reel of lived experience. Angela Cavallo lifts a car with hands that should never bear such weight. Stephen Wiltshire draws entire cities from memory after a single glance. Shakuntala Devi outpaces calculators with mental arithmetic that arrives in bursts of brilliance. Christopher deciphers languages as if born into every one. João de Deus touches people and they heal. Wim Hof sits in ice, smiling as his body warms itself from within. 10 people, 10 anomalies. But together they form a constellation of human potential that science has yet to chart. What unites them isn't superpower or mutation. It's the quiet suggestion that we are more than we've been told, that our biology holds capabilities waiting just beneath the surface, dormant not because they must be, but because we've never learned how to reach them. Some were activated by trauma, others by isolation. Some were born into their brilliance. Others found it through practice. But in every case, their abilities force us to ask uncomfortable questions about what normal really means. Could our limits be artificial? Modern science is good at classification. It names, measures, defines. But these individuals live beyond its definitions. Their abilities have been studied, confirmed, and yet not explained. They exist in the margins where biology ends and mystery begins. And what if they aren't outliers but frontrunners? What if the true evolution of humanity isn't mechanical or genetic, but inward, not in building faster machines, but in discovering deeper capacities within ourselves? The final part of this journey does not offer answers, but opens a door. Behind it lies the possibility that our understanding of the human mind and body is still in its infancy. and that the next frontier may not be in space or code, but in waking up to the quiet brilliance already within us. Close your eyes. Breathe. Imagine that the limits you feel, of memory, of perception, of strength, are not walls but veils. What if they're only thin layers of habit waiting to be pierced? The stories we've explored are not tales of superhumans, but of humans in rare states. States that reveal what lies dormant in us all. A mother lifting a car. A blind man mapping the world in clicks. A man warming himself against snow with thought alone. A savant sketching cities from a single glance. These are not legends. They are documented truths that quietly, stubbornly resist easy explanation. They remind us that the brain is not static. It is fluid, changeable, full of untapped potential. That the body is not fragile but wise, capable of feats far beyond our assumptions. That perception, memory, healing, and strength are not fixed traits but thresholds, and under the right conditions, they can shift. What we accept as normal human function may be a cultural compromise, a reflection not of our true capacity, but of our collective forgetting. Each case we've seen suggests that the extraordinary is not reserved for the few. It is not magic nor mutation. It is human. Rare, yes, but within reach. Whether through trauma, training, or accident, these individuals tapped into a deeper layer of the self. One not often accessible in daily life. What if the boundaries of our abilities are more mental than biological? What if we could see further, remember longer, feel deeper, heal faster? Not through enhancements or technology, but through reconnection to something ancient, inherent, and whole. The future of human potential may not lie in rewiring who we are, but in remembering who we've always been. And so we return to the quiet question that lingers after each story. What else lies sleeping within you, just waiting to be awakened? In the end, we are left not with certainty, but with wonder. The 10 stories we've followed do not form a theory. They form a mirror, one that reflects the vast, unexplored terrain of human potential. Not one of these individuals set out to be extraordinary. They simply lived, endured, survived. And in the cracks of their ordinary lives, something brilliant emerged. Lightning turned numbers into visions. Blindness sharpened sound into sight. Emotion etched every moment into memory. Crisis called forth strength that should not have been possible. Minds lit up with languages never taught. Hands brought healing. Breath became fire. Each story is a fracture in the boundary of what we believe to be true. Together, they ask us to reconsider everything. What is intelligence? What is memory? What is the body capable of when pushed or awakened? Science, for all its wisdom, is still young. It can measure neurons firing, molecules shifting, but it cannot yet measure intuition. It cannot chart the moment when a man lifts a car or when a child speaks 10 languages without understanding how. It cannot fully grasp how sound becomes sight or why the mind might sometimes heal what medicine cannot. But these mysteries are not failures of science. They are its future. They remind us that the most powerful laboratory may be within ourselves. So we close, not with a conclusion, but with an invitation. An invitation to wonder, to question the invisible thresholds we live within. To ask not what separates us from these extraordinary individuals, but what connects us. To consider that genius, strength, memory, resilience, these are not gifts of the few, but seeds in us all. Waiting. Perhaps the next great discovery in human potential will not come from a machine, a genome, or a lab. Perhaps it will come from a breath, a moment of silence, a bolt of lightning, or the simple act of asking, gently, what else is possible?